Today, we're going to be sharing some expert BRRRR strategies for real estate investing in Canada 2023. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Property Hustler Show. My name is Andrew, and today, Ping and I are joined by Kellan James, who is a longtime Canadian real estate investor with a portfolio of over 80 units and 13 million in real estate value. And he has this all on his own. It's all through his BRRRR strategy. He is a BRRRR strategy specialist, and he's going to be sharing some of his expert tips on how you can employ the BRRRR strategy today. So, Kellan, great having you on the show.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
What were you doing before 2019?
So 2016 was when I bought my first property. Before that, I was working in the tech world. I worked for Cisco and did like systems integration and like that kind of stuff. When I moved to London, I sold my car and I just walked to work every day and saved every penny I could. I ended up saving 100 grand or like 120 grand or something around there.
Over how long?
Over like 5 years kind of thing. Like from 2012.
20 grand a year.
2012
that was a good income from Cisco, then.
I was making like 50 grand. I just lived super cheap. I had a 2-bedroom apartment. I split with somebody and I had no utilities and I had
London?
And I had no car in London. Yeah.
Okay, so rent must have been pretty cheap.
It was cheap at the time. Cheap.
Yeah.
Well, I got a cheap apartment at the time. So, yeah. And it was walkable to work. So I walked to work and I worked a second job on the side on the weekends as well. And just kind of did and just saved everything I could. Yeah. So I had about 120 grand saved up. That's what I started with. I paid my way through school and all that stuff as well. And then I was like, Mr. Money Mustache. I was like, this guy's like inspiring. I see the other side. I don't want to have to work a 9 to 5 forever. Okay, index funds look like a good option. I'm going to start with that. And so I saved every penny I could. That was what I was doing, was trying to save, to the point where maybe I can get $1 million or 750,000 saved up, with index funds over a 12-year period or whatever it was, I forgot the numbers were. And then it'd be enough for me to have 35 to 40 grand a year that I could live off of the 4% safe withdrawal rate and kind of do it like that. And then I was like, well, that's okay, cool. Like there's option one, like that looks like a good plan. And then I was like, well, I also want to buy a house. So at some point I'm going to want to probably own a house. So I'll have to also buy a car if I get a house. What if I bought a duplex? And I started kind of looking into that a little bit. And then I was on the personal finance subreddit and I saw someone talk about bigger pockets. And this was 2016. And so there wasn't really much happening in the meetup space in Canada, like basically at all, other than like Keyspire and some of these like these older school.
The rich dad group.
Yeah. And bigger pockets, I listened to like 100 episodes. I just got completely hyperfixated on it. Some of the episodes would say like, like this is the best system we have right now. Just set an alert for your city. And if someone talks about your city on one of our posts, you'll hear about it. And so I made a thing said London, Ontario. And I got like a couple months later or something, I got an alert. Someone's like, hey, anyone else in London, Ontario that's like investing in real estate, maybe into BRRRRing? It was like BRRRRing because this was like the phrase was kind of coming out around that time. It's like, awesome, someone doing this maybe in Canada or wants to do this in Canada. And I ended up going out to that meetup and Matt McKeever was there, Jeff Weibo. Shortly after, we had guys like Mike Rosart, Dylan McLaughlin. We ended up starting London on Fire at the time. It was like a local meetup group. We had people coming from like Buffalo. We had them coming from all over like Southern Ontario and Northern Ontario. And like, because there was no other meetup groups. There was like none. Now they're everywhere, obviously, but like there was nothing. So it was always completely free. And it was about financial independence, retire early. But we all realized we were kind of into the real estate thing. But we were like, well, financial independence through real estate. And how can we build up enough cash flow so that we can potentially leave our jobs? I know at the time, McKeever had like 13 units. I was just blown away. I was like, this is super cool. It was just some student rentals. And I was just a deer in the headlights. And I was just absorbing everything I could, asking good questions. And that was like one of my key success factors, was just asking great questions. Anything I didn't understand, I would ask the question until I understood it. And then I'd ask the next questions and I would just kind of, learn from there.
But that's actually, I think, one of the really good things that I feel a lot of people aren't able to even figure out is how to even know what questions to ask.
Yeah.
Right? Because...
Well, what are you confused about? If you don't have the answer to what the next steps are in your journey, then that's the question you need to ask. So like every meetup I'd go to, I'd be like, what am I stuck on right now? Like, what is stopping me from the next stage? And I'd be like, oh, that's what I probably need to understand is like, how do I approach the financing? How do I find a deal? Whatever it is. And like, what are the steps I can take? And so I would go to the people who've done it before and ask them. And I would ask them specific questions about what I can work on. And then I would actually do it. And then I would go back to them and say, I did those things. What's next? And they'd be like, whoa, you actually did something. Because most of the time mentors are used to people not actually taking action.
Exactly.
And so I'd be like, hey, I did this. And they'd be like, awesome. Like now do this. And I'd come back next time. I did that.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, this works. And, I do mentorship now and that's the same system I follow, right? It's like, here are the next steps, go do them. 2 weeks later, here are the next steps, go do them. And after 6-12 months, you've done some significant things.
Yes. By the way, before you even get to this stage, you spend a lot of time listening to the podcast, right? Try to gather as much information as possible, right?
Yeah. And I was trying to sift through American content and apply it to Canada the best I could.
Yeah. So right now we have a lot more like Canadian real estate resource information that we can actually share online. So, but here's the thing: a lot of people actually couldn't even get through that phase, right? To merge themselves into the podcast, into everything,
Right.
Because they either just don't prioritize that, or they feel like that's still too far away from them.
I think the early stages of financial independence are about running away from something, and then later it becomes running towards something. So I was running away from the job. I knew I didn't want to work the next 30 years at this job. Plenty motivation for me to be like, how do I get out of this, right? How do I escape this? That was plenty motivation for me to just work constantly to get out of that place. It actually only took me 2.5 years.
Nice.
From 2016 to 2019, I left my job. We had 32 units at that time. So I took the 120 grand of my own money and I got it up to 32 units with it in London, Ontario, and all with no partners. And then that was when I left my job.
Okay, I think we need to talk about that because this is something that, like, if I had to think about how to do that, I feel that we could come up with it. Especially because you hear people who started off with less money than that, and they were able to grow it into something, right?
Yeah.
But I think for people listening, they'll want to know how that process actually looked, right?
Yeah.
Like, because when you say you didn't do it on yourself, a lot of people say that the best way to get into, especially in today's market, is through some kind of partnership.
Yeah.
Right? Like, how do you qualify for mortgages, even, right? With the stress tolerances the way they are, stress tests the way they are, you need more income put towards these things. But there's obviously other ways around it, right?
Yeah.
So your first property, like, did you put the whole $130,000 into it, or like, how did that look?
So the first property I did 5% down.
Yeah.
It was $177,000 for this duplex.
Yeah.
5% was a little over $8,000. So, and I took that $8,000 out of my RSP using the home buyer's plan. So I took 25 grand out because that was at the time what you were allowed. I think it's 35 now. I only had to use 8 of it for that first property. So that was the extra 20 grand or something was in my RSP. The 100 was out, the 20 was in. I was able to pull 25 out and use 8 of it for that property. And then I was able to use the rest of it for the next property, which is actually totally legal. You're able to pull out more than you need to for the first purchase. I had some good momentum already. I lived now for free. I lived in one half of the duplex.
It was a duplex, yeah.
Lived in the duplex, lived for free. And then I said, okay, well, now the next one's going to be 20% down. And I know I need to make it significant value add so that I'd be able to BRRRR it and keep up momentum. Because property number 2 was when I went, should I take on a partner? Because, some people were starting to talk about that. And I was like,
OPM.
I was like, well, I think I can do this myself. So I looked at it and went, okay, yeah, I mean, I have the 20% and I know that I don't have all the expertise, but I can learn at this stage. So I took on a property. I asked for it to be vacant on possession. It had like drug users and stuff in it, drug dealers in it, actually. I was like, well, I'm going to ask for it to be vacant. I went in like 25 or 50 grand under asking or something like that. And then they counted at 25 grand under asking and I just immediately accepted.
Is that a single family home or
this was a duplex as well?
Duplex as well. Okay.
Yeah, and they accepted it with it vacant. And on the day it was closed, it was actually like broom swept, ready for me to start renovating. So day one, I was super. You don't get this stuff unless you ask for it. But a lot of people hear this stuff and they think, well, yeah, you could do that now, or you did then, but you can't do it now. But like I could tell you about an 8-plex I just did a year ago that went swimmingly. So that was a property where I ended up. I renovated that as cheaply as I could, which looking back, actually this one did work out well, but it was only because I sold it because I didn't renovate it the way I wanted to keep it forever. But I ended up only putting 25 grand in renovations in for both units total, including the roof.
Were you doing the work yourself?
I did a bunch of it myself, but I don't know how to do any of this stuff. I just helped with demo and, cleaning up and painting and whatever I could figure out. And I did a bad job, but we kept the cabinets, we painted them. We put I say we, I just mean my contractors and I put in dishwashers. We actually did demo the stairs and run them straight so that the upstairs unit or upstairs bedrooms could be functional. Yeah.
By the way, I want to point something out there since you mentioned that, especially from the sweat equity perspective.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't realize when they consider, do I have the skill set to do any of this stuff, right?
Yeah.
My family ran a construction company, and so I can tell you from experience that if you have somebody go in and clean the canvas, right, like to do demolition work, clean everything up, it means that whoever you're hiring as a primary contractor or the specialist, they don't have to come in and do that work. So you're not paying $60, $70 an hour guys to take off the drywall so they can like run their plumbing or their wires, right? Or to fix these things. So the low, let's call it low skill set jobs, for sweat equity makes a huge difference in your cost
Yeah.
overall to the construction if you want to put it in.
A big part of it is that you're on site and you're keeping an eye on things. People are way more productive when you're actually there watching them.
100%.
So that was huge. I was there all the time while people were working, so things moved along a lot quicker.
Yeah.
And the value of sweat equity is especially important in the early stages. It doesn't matter as much once you've got a bunch of properties in your belt, but in those early stages, that if you can keep $5 extra grand in your pocket, that's $5 toward the next property. It really makes a difference early on. Everyone knows how compound interest works. The more you start with, the better though, right? And so the more you can compound things early, the faster things compound later.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's different if you had a job that you had to take time away from in order to go there and do that, which I don't know. Did you?
I worked a full-time job during all of this. I had a full-time job until 32 units. That was when I left, but I worked evenings and weekends on it.
Evenings and weekends.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And I worked till like midnight every night and all week, on the weekends. And
That just tells people that it's totally possible, right? A lot of people use, I don't have time as an excuse not to get into real estate, but you do have time. Like you just need to like set things up correctly.
Yeah, you just had to prioritize it. I just worked my ass off. That's all I did for those first 3 years. Real estate was everything. Work, my job, but then like even while I was at work, I'd be obviously like sending some emails to contractors or lawyers and whatever I needed to, specialists to help.
Yeah,
sending out offers, whatever I needed to do.
Yeah.
There's a couple of challenge questions there that I feel a lot of people encounter when they start considering sweat equity. When people start to do work on the weekends, what a lot of people end up experiencing is the work just stagnates, right? Because they're unable to push the progress forward. And when you have your carrying costs, when you have everything utilities, and you need to get the place rented, and you're only putting in weekends, how quickly are you possibly going to get it done? Yeah. Does it make sense to just borrow the money to pay a professional to do it fast rather than you do it slowly over the course of weekends over the 2-3 months?
Yeah, this one took me a few months. I would say if the project's a few months, saving 2 months isn't that big. I think the momentum of your money is more important at that stage. So yeah, I think the value of sweat equity early on, like if the project's going to take 6 months versus hiring it out and getting it done in 2, then I could make sense of that. But if you can get it done by getting in there and getting some sweat equity yourself, get it done in 3 to 4 months kind of thing, I think that makes total sense.
Yeah, the biggest difference between you and other contractors who want to become a real estate investor is that they're actually taking on other jobs, right? And then they're only doing that at their spare time. With you had a contractor on site, right?
Yeah.
So throughout the day, even though you're not there, but at least that the work is being done.
One of the main guys that I had working on it also worked on it only evenings and weekends with me.
Oh,
yeah.
You're really saving money.
That guy also had a full-time job.
Got it.
But at the time I was paying him 20 or 25 an hour, and we just did everything we could and kept track of the hours. And yeah, it was evenings and weekends for both of us. There was, if I brought in a plumber or an electrician, then they would be out there during the day, and occasionally, I'd show up at the property and something was done while I was at work, and that became a wonderful feeling when I was able to do more of that. I did everything I could to get that job done as quickly as I could and as cheaply as I could, and I ended up being in for only 100. I bought it for 127, and I put in 25. I was in for 150, and it reappraised at 250 because duplexes at that time were more like 250. But I got a really good deal on the buy.
That's awesome.
So reappraised. It was a perfect BRRRR and more.
This is the second property.
That was
right?
property 2. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. How did you get into 3? Yeah.
Property 3 I bought on the same day as property 2. So I had enough capital that I was able to put 20% down on 2 at that time. Yeah. So that one's the one we just talked about. The second one is the one I still live in to this day. It was a triplex. That one I actually structured with cash back on closing, depending on the bank and stuff you're working with. And sometimes this can get into gray areas, but you can have situations where you get cash back after you've purchased the property from the seller, and that allowed me to have less money in the deal on the acquisition.
Right.
That's American strategy.
Yeah, price inflation.
Yeah. I mean, it was extremely uncommon at the time. I found somebody who knew how to structure this, and I talked to my accountant. They talked to their accountant. The government doesn't care about any of this. You can be completely open with them about it. Banks are another story, so you need to make sure you're working with banks that, depending on how the APS looks or what contracts you have involved, you need to make sure that you're not getting yourself into trouble.
Yeah, one of the most challenging parts about that, I think, is that when you try to teach somebody, especially on the selling side, how to do this, and they've never heard of it, their realtor's never heard of it before, and it just sketches people out.
It has to be off. So property 3 was my first off-market deal. That one I found, it was a police officer. I found it through a rental ad, actually. I called up a rental ad and said, hey, I know I'm not actually a tenant looking to buy this, or looking to rent, but I might like to buy your property. He was like, yeah, I'd be open to it. And there's already a vacant unit, of course, because there's a unit up for rent. And I have the landlord's phone number. So I gave him a call and met up with him. And he was open to selling. We structured it. I sort of trusted him enough to do this structure with him. Again, another property where, first off, property property 1 is only 8 grand out of pocket or so. Property 2, and even to this day, a 5% down might be 20 grand. It's not like some crazy numbers, that, you can keep up some decent momentum when your down payment's at that size. Property 2, again, was I got all my money out and more. And then property 3, I left some money in, but that was totally fine.
Did you ever refinance property 1? Because you went 5% in, which means you can't do that on the refinance.
I did end up refinancing, but so you're at 95% loan to value when you buy with 5% down. So you generally aren't going to refinance because you can't refinance past 80% loan to value. So I didn't end up refinancing it until years down the road when it was worth quite a bit more. And I sold it for $450 recently, actually. But you can get up to 95% loan to value on a refinance, essentially, if you do a purchase plus improvements mortgage.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're buying with 5% down and you're working with someone like Scotiabank, you can use a purchase plus improvements mortgage and say, I'm going to put 40 grand of renovations into this property. Say I'm buying for 300 or 400, I'm putting 40 in. It's going to be worth 440 by the time I'm done. Appraiser agrees, the bank agrees, and when you do, and you close on the property, they have 40 grand held back, ready to release to you once you've completed those renovations. So once they're done, the appraiser comes in, verifies the work was done, and the bank gives you that 40 grand back, which essentially brings you back up to 95% loan to value.
Okay. Right. Is that something that you can do after you already have your mortgage in place, or is it something that you can do, or you have to do before?
You do it up front.
Okay.
There are ways to structure this. It's not called the purchase plus improvements, but certain banks will do something like this. After you've already closed on the place.
Yeah.
But generally, for most people, once you've closed on a place, you're going to be looking more at a full refinance. And it depends on the deal. Like I ended up doing a whole bunch of purchase plus improvements mortgages for the first 10 properties. And then I had some that were BRRRRs and stuff like that as well. And then some cashback and closing deals. But it was always I always made sure that every deal I was getting a chunk of my money back out. Hopefully all of my money, but not all of them were perfect BRRRRs. I had like a bunch of perfect BRRRRs, but not all of them.
Right.
Because sometimes you need to leave some money in a deal, the right property in the right location, or you know that this is going to be a BRRRR 2 or 3 years down the line because it's going to, like I bought a sixplex. It took me 3 years to BRRRR, but it's because I had to get 6 tenants out.
Yeah.
So it took quite a while. I ended up refinancing it after I got 4 or 5 of them out, but always trying to keep up momentum. And when you're doing it yourself without partners, that's really the only way to do it.
Yeah, exactly. By the way, let's get back to the whole journey. So property 3, you did also do the improvement triplex, right?
Yes.
Did you BRRRR that, or did you like?
No, I did that one with cashback and closing.
Cashback and closing.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I live in that one to this day. So I live in a 2-bedroom unit. I have a tenant upstairs paying $1,400 or $1,500, and I have another one paying $1,100 in the front.
Okay,
and
so
we have our own little patio with a hot tub in the back, and
Nice.
separate and private. And so you can actually still have like the feeling like you have your own home while still having multiple other tenants.
For sure. And we're doing the same thing with our office too, right?
Yeah.
The basement, there are 3 units, right? There's a unit in the back, right? We're renting it out because now like we don't have to pay for the mortgage.
It's honestly extremely rare to find successful investors that don't house hack or haven't house hacked.
Exactly.
It's almost exclusively how it works.
Question for you is that at number 3, how did you qualify for the next one?
Yeah, so with Scotiabank, which is the lender I worked with up until the first 10 properties, they're going to use something called the 50% rule. So you want to take the total gross rents, divide it by 2, that's the 50%, and then subtract your mortgage payment and subtract your property taxes and insurance. Property taxes and heat. Adds up to 0 or more, then the property floats itself or cash flows. If it's negative, then the property is in a deficit. If it's in a deficit, your qualifying ability is reduced. If it's neutral, your qualifying ability is the same. Every property I got was in an attempt to meet the 50% rule after refinancing. So if it met that rule, I knew that I could then reapproach the bank and have the same qualifying ability as I would have had I not bought that property at all. And oftentimes when you're qualifying for a property, you're able to qualify a lot better if the property has some form of income, or they can do a Schedule A showing that there is potential rent on a vacant unit.
These means it's have to be legal units. So the triplex was a legal triplex.
Yeah. Yeah, if it's like I actually have never added a basement unit to a single family home. I think that's kind of the worst of both worlds. There's a lot of beginners that are taking that approach, and it's one of the hardest things to do. And the result after $100,000 in renovations and a ton of your time is you own a duplex.
Right.
I would rather find creative strategies or deal with troublesome tenants, get some turnovers, that kind of stuff, and add value that way than do these massive renovations and deal with the city for permits and all that stuff.
So you like to work with existing bones mostly?
Basically, exclusively. I add bedrooms, I'll add bathrooms, things like that to add value. But for the most part, turning units over is where most of the value is had.
Mm-hmm.
And that's done nowadays through cash for keys. So I've probably paid, I'd like to add it up, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was $250,000 in cash for keys at this point. across the portfolio over time.
Guys, tenants are making money.
I know.
Yeah, and I am by doing it, so it's a win-win. And that's like, how do you get troublesome tenants out? You pay them.
Yeah.
They're not leaving. Pay them more. Stay on top of them. Offer this to them, because very commonly we'll pay $10,000 for a tenant to leave.
Yeah,
But-
you know what? Actually, we sometimes discuss this ethically about how often we should talk about cash for keys as the necessary means, because it's almost becoming a trend where
Yeah.
tenants who are becoming aware of this are just like, oh, I'm thinking of moving. I'm just going to abuse this and make it so that if I stop paying rent, my landlord's probably going to offer me a cash for keys deal to leave.
Yeah, well,
And it's like,
welcome
wow,
to
that's abusive.
investing in Ontario in 2023 and on, and
Yeah.
it shows the value of turning units over now, because this is only going to get harder and harder as the years go on.
Yeah.
So if you have tenants that are paying half of what they should pay, you need to do this now, because 10 years from now, 20 years from now, they might still be there, and they're going to be even less likely to accept cash for keys at that time. So
Yeah.
turnover now is everything,
Yeah.
and it costs a lot less now than it will in the future as well.
I want to bring it back to a journey understanding position where when you're now at 3 properties, and we can start to see where people in general will start to encounter problems scaling after, let's say, 5, 6 properties,
Yeah.
and then you have to start going into a sort of a different class of property or a different formula, because after like 5 or 6 properties, for most people, based off of their income, the stress tolerance, the banks won't lend you after a certain point. But you say you're going
it's a
on the
myth.
50.
It's
Okay.
a myth. So it's a myth. It's actually more of a misunderstanding than it is a myth. It's something that's been propagated for years, and for a few years now, I've been opening people's eyes to the fact that this isn't true.
Yeah.
So the reason that people often hit a roadblock at 5 or 6 properties is because they're working with a mortgage broker rather than working directly with the bank.
Mhm.
Someone like Scotiabank, you'll go up to 10 buildings if you work with them directly. If you're working through a broker, it's going to be more like 4 to 6 before they cut you off. Then you need to go direct. After that, even, you can continue to scale by working with credit unions. You don't need to move into a different class of properties. You just need to work with a different class of lenders. So you can still continue to buy duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes with credit unions. That means looking in your local area to see which credit unions will service it. You know, in Ontario, we've got Libro, we've got Meridian, we've got Main Street. We've got a whole bunch of other ones in all these other cities that I'm not aware of.
Yeah. There's
but
also cultural credit unions too, like Latvia, and I know that there's a great.
I've heard of some like religious type ones and stuff as well. I'm not sure how it works, but like I literally know of people who are like, yeah, like I had to show that I'm like in this religion in order to get accepted for a mortgage. I was like, wow, I've never heard of this, but
That's going the mile.
yeah, exactly.
That's
But,
funny.
yeah, credit unions are key. When I left my job, I had 10 buildings. I was like, I want to keep buying. I don't want to do it with partners. I don't want to have to then bring some, because those are the two solutions people find. Oh, either move into a different class of properties like apartment buildings so I can use commercial financing, or bring on partners so that they can qualify.
Mm-hmm.
Well, no, you can continue doing it yourself if you work with the right lenders and if you're doing the right deals. If the deals if you're adding enough value to the deal, then you don't need a partner, because if you're going to pull the money out, it may as well be your own money. If you're going to do all that work, it may as well be your building.
Okay, were you buying these properties? You have a wife,
Fiance,
a fiance? Okay,
Nice.
was she part of
Congrats.
this journey?
No, so she has her own separate portfolio. She's gotten up to like 20 units herself, completely separately. We do our own things at this
Okay,
point.
so you weren't qualifying with her.
No.
Okay.
All myself.
How much were you earning that you were leveraging in terms of your own income?
Yeah, I made 50 grand to start in my career in 2012, and by the end I only made 80 by 2016. So
Okay.
80 grand was my salary.
So people are definitely working with more than you had.
Oh
right?
yeah,
So
100%.
they should be able to do stuff.
100%. And yeah, properties were cheaper when I was buying, so that's the elephant in the room. But incomes are higher now than they were at that time as well. The reality of it is, like, you know, we always tried to meet something like the 1% rule early on, right? Like, you know, buying a $200,000 property, I'd like to make $2,000 a month. And then as it started getting to $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 properties, it's like, well, you're not going to really. I mean, it's very difficult to hit the 1% rule. I've still done it quite a few times, but the reality of it is you don't often have to, because the way that amortization schedules and stuff work, the mortgage doesn't scale up the same way that rental income does when you're looking at that ratio. So you don't always need to get like as times change, as values go up, as qualifying ability changes, as rents go up, a lot of these things, the dust settles in that, like, it still works. And I think a lot of people tend to look back and say, like, these things worked in the past, but the reality is, like, I work with people today and I'm teaching them how to do the exact same stuff. It is, I would say, overall more difficult, especially right now with interest rates. The reality of it is it's going to be difficult to buy properties that cash flow significantly with current interest rates. Then the focus becomes instead on building equity, forcing appreciation, and then having a building you're willing to own, happy to own for the long term, getting mortgage pay down, appreciation, and you'll get some significant cash flow in the future. But if you have a building that's floating itself right now, I wouldn't be super worried. I mean, that's pretty good if you have a variable mortgage and it's floating itself. You're doing all right. Your portfolio has been tested at this point.
Right.
If it's losing significant amounts of money right now, which a lot of people's portfolios are, I would look at potentially offloading 1 or 2 buildings, paying off some debts, kind of restructuring things, and restabilizing. I know I did that recently. I bought 51 units in 2021, and right before a lot of these rates have gone up. So I have a 24 unit apartment building. The mortgage went up $8,000 a month in like a year. Yeah. So I was like, okay, well now I got to readjust because I'm not happy with how things look month to month. And the solution to this isn't borrow more money from private lenders and things like that and just kick the can down the road. I want to make sense of things long term, but also month to month.
For sure.
So I've been restructuring debt. I've sold a couple properties, paid off some private loans to get back into a safe place. But there's plenty of people who are just borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, and I don't think that makes. I don't think that's ethical.
By the way, that's actually a really good advice to a lot of people because a lot of people are people who are in that kind of position. They don't think about selling properties or offloading the assets that they finally earned or acquired.
Yeah.
Right. But sometimes making a business decision is actually really important.
They let ego get in the way.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I didn't want to sell a couple of these. One of them I didn't really want to sell. It was my first property, so it was kind of an emotional thing. But I had too much equity sitting in it, and it just made sense to let it go and take that money and just pay off a good sized private loan and just be done with it. The triplex that I sold recently, I was okay to let it go. It was a property that I own right beside the triplex I live in, so I had to deal with a different ownership structure to make sure they don't merge. Because in Ontario, if you own 2 properties side by side with identical ownership, like the same name on title, they automatically merge without people even knowing it, and they only find out upon the sale.
Exactly. People should know. A lawyer should really.
They really should.
Yeah.
I
don't know how people. I see it happen. I have no idea how it happens.
By the way, did you put all of your portfolio under a corporation in the very beginning? Or?
The first 10 or 11 properties I owned personally in my personal name.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's doable. And with people like Scotiabank. I did set up a 3-tiered corporate structure a few years ago now. So I have a holding company, a real estate company, and a property management company. But it's no longer acting as a property management company. It's more active income. So I do my coaching in that. I could do flips or wholesales in that. Wholesales, any of that, any active income, because active income is taxed at only 12% in a corporation, whereas passive income is taxed at almost 50%.
Yeah.
So you really want to avoid earning passive income in a corporation. So the purpose of the 3-tiered structure is to charge, like the property management company can charge the real estate company property management fees, which reduces the income in the real estate corporation, which reduces its tax, increases the income in the property management company, which only gets taxed at 12%. Any leftover profits in that company, you can move it back into the real estate company through the holding company, through an intercompany transfer, tax-free. You can earn active income at 12% and then buy real estate in your passive corporation. And you can do that without having to deal with loans and stuff when you have this structure, because you can loan money between corporations, but then you got to keep track of all that, and it's just a little messy.
Yeah, the loan payback is and all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
And there's also a term. Question for you. So when you're structuring this type of stuff, when you were talking about like 10 properties, did you mix it with wholesaling? Because you mentioned wholesaling. Did you do some wholesaling? Did you do some like flips, right? To kind of like mix it up with your investment strategy?
Almost exclusively BRRRRing, and this wasn't due to lack of opportunities or not seeing these opportunities. It was quite the opposite. I spent plenty of time ruminating and decide, should I do Airbnb? Should I do some flips? Should I do some wholesale? Should I do some wholesales? Should I all this stuff out there? Should I get my realtor license? Like whatever, right? I was like, you know what? I'm making a lot doing BRRRRing properties. Like that's going to be my focus. I don't want to get distracted with all this other stuff. There were occasionally times where I'd come across a building. It wasn't quite for me, but I knew other investors. I'd pass it along to them for a bird dog fee, or I'd I've had some coaching students where I'll for $5,000 or something, they can take that building as like a wholesale fee kind of thing. But otherwise, no, it's been almost exclusively just BRRRRing to this day still. And I think that like it's so important for people to look at how people got to where they are and not and what they did to get there, rather than look at what they're doing now. Because a lot of people are taking advice from people who have already made it, and they're doing things completely different than how they got to where they are. That's why it's so important to talk to people or work with people that understand what the journey looks like,
Exactly.
and walk you through that process, and not just now I'm stock trading, now I'm doing Airbnbs, now I'm doing all this other stuff. It's like cool, but like, is that how you earned your wealth? Is that how you built your portfolio?
Right.
And the reality is, it isn't. So I've just been BRRRRing from day one.
Yeah.
I have 83 units at this point. And it's still no joint venture partners, all in the same city, all long-term rentals, no short-term, no furnished rentals. They're all 1-2 bedroom apartments, and it works. So I'm just going to continue doing the same thing year after year.
Quitting your job is something where it's like people are like, okay, I need to work a job. I need to continue working my job in order to qualify for mortgages. That's the main reason why you need to have a job if you're planning on investing in real estate.
For sure.
Even if you create a corporation and you decide, okay, I'm going to start paying myself, you want to pay yourself through the corporation,
Yeah.
which would be one of my questions. So at what point did you decide to quit your job because this income was enough for you, one, to live off of, and two, in order to continue qualifying for mortgages?
I think I had about 7 or 10 grand a month in cash flow when I left my job. When I left my job just from the portfolio, I had a really high cash flow portfolio. Rates were pretty low at that time, so that helped a lot. I also lived quite frugally. When I had about 5 grand a month cash flow, I was like, I could leave at this point. Like I live in a triplex. I drive a Hyundai Accent. I still drive a Hyundai Accent. I don't spend too much, so I felt pretty safe. I mean, Elon Musk talked about it. Like, I think he lived on $1 a day for food for a month just to show that he could. And actually right now during this market, this is like a time when a lot of people are cutting back their expenses. And like, if you came from a frugal background to begin with, you're a lot more comfortable cutting things back because it's how you've always lived. And the abundance and stuff was just something that you took on when things were going well. But when you can kind of cut back, and like even recently, I've just, it doesn't feel right to be like spending as much as I was when things were going extremely well with interest rates and all that stuff. So I've adjusted my lifestyle and it feels exactly the same. So it feels almost exactly the same. We used to have a cleaner. We started cleaning our house again ourselves, and like just certain little things like that. But like, it's just a mentality, I think, during a market like this for people to kind of, like, hey, like let's chill out on the expenses and
As for the qualifying criteria, was 7 grand like about the comfortable threshold? Has that pretty much replaced your existing income?
The question is more interesting when it's what should other people do, I suppose.
Yeah.
Because like my situation's mine, but like the tough thing is in this market, it's tough to have enough cash flow to quit your job, right? With these interest rates. So are people just going to work forever? Do they have to wait for rates to drop? Like, what do people do now?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there's a ton of comfort that comes from just building a significant net worth. So if you have $500,000, $1 million in equity or something across your portfolio, you could feel pretty decent at that point about leaving your job. If you also have some comfort in your ability to earn income, active income, or take on more deals, like you've talked to your lender and said, hey, if I leave my job, could I continue to qualify? No. Okay, well, I'm going to talk to a lender that until I find one that says yes. Now I don't need the job income to qualify for the next property. So can I make money on the next deal? Is that enough income for me to feel like, I don't need the job income? Can I do 1 or 2 deals a year and make 50 or 100 grand? Like, is that enough to feel like you don't necessarily need the active income? A lot of it comes down to a mentality. It's a really difficult thing for people to wrap their heads around because people really like to make sense of things month to month. And it's really difficult to do that with real estate because real estate's all over the place. It has been, at least. So I think that, some comfort comes from just building a significant net worth, because the reality is at that point, you can kind of look at the safe withdrawal rate. If you have $1 million in net worth in equity in your portfolio and things like that, you've got equivalent of about 40 grand a year of passive income with the safe withdrawal rate if you were to just sell the whole portfolio and put it into index funds. So you've kind of got your foundation, and then it's a bet on yourself. Like at that point, do you feel confident in your ability to earn at least 50 grand a year, doing some flips or doing some other more BRRRRs, The reality of it is that a lot of people are going to some degree live off of refinance funds as well. It's not something that people are particularly comfortable with the idea of, but it's also the reality for the most part of BRRRR investing. The only way around that is to do fewer deals, or take on partners, or have active income of some other sort, some other side business.
I appreciate the detail like in your response, right? Because a lot of times when people are talking about like BRRRRing properties, they don't talk about, hey, listen, like your exit strategy is now in the refinance, but that's still a loan. Yes. That's not really an income. Yeah. Right. It's tax free. Everything's nice. But if you don't allocate that into the right thing, which is another income producing assets, it can be pretty dangerous, right?
Yeah, exactly. You generally don't want to be using your refinance funds to buy a car or a hot tub or whatever, unless you make or every once in a while you offload a property and you kind of realize actual funds, you've paid your tax, I sold off. So in 2021, I sold 5 buildings, which was 15 units. I don't remember what the total capital gain was, but I know the tax was like $320,000 330 grand or 380, I think 380 grand. So I did,
crazy.
as you can imagine, a very significant capital gain from the sale of those properties. Because a lot of them I bought in the 1s and 2s and sold in the 5s and 6s. Like, when you do sell these properties, there's a significant tax bill coming. Luckily, it comes with significant chunks of money being deposited in your account upon the sale of those properties. But yeah, people need to, like, when they're calculating their net worth, they need to realize as well that there's a significant capital gain coming upon the sale of these buildings.
Yeah.
If your plan is to own them for 20 years, then the reality of it is it's okay to kick that can down the road, because say you have $1 million in capital gains tax to pay 20 years from now, it's fine if your net worth's 10 million. It's not a problem at all. And that is sort of how things work. Like that tax bill sucked, but it was, I had like $1.5 million of money that I'd pulled out of the buildings, so it was fine at the same time. I ended up taking that money and putting it toward a bunch of apartment buildings. So
yeah. By the way, a lot of people who are struggling with BRRRR method is literally because when you're BRRRRing, you're drawing more loan and then you put it into the next property. If the next property doesn't generate enough cash flow, it affects the entire portfolio. So I like how you mentioned that you did actually offload some properties, because that becomes your exit strategy to pay down some of the mortgage.
Yeah. Well, what happened there was it was private loans. Like I had private loans, if you borrow money for down payments and then the rest of the money is being borrowed from the bank, like you need a plan to pay out those private loans. And with this market, what's happened to every single BRRRR investor is when they go to refinance, they're not getting the loan to value they want. I don't know how much people are talking about this stuff, but this is the reality of the last year for all BRRRR investors. You bring it in for a refinance, you don't get the loan to value you want. Therefore, you don't get as much money out of the deal. And if you borrowed money and you need to pay those people out, well, now your refinance funds aren't enough to pay those people out. What do? Maybe you have other buildings you can refinance. If you don't, well, you can borrow more money to pay those people off, or you can sell a property to pay those people off. And I didn't like the idea of just borrowing more. And so this last while the goal has been pay off all my private loans. So I'm like basically there at this point.
Yeah.
So, sell a couple properties off and pay, like some of these buildings will have a few $100,000 in equity in them. So it's just use that, pay the loans off, and be done with things.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. No,
mental state.
Yeah. Loans don't exactly ease your mental state. So it's definitely a good idea to realize some profits.
The reality with a lot of private loans is they don't have renewals as easily as banks and stuff, right?
Yeah.
Or credit unions and banks. Like your mortgage comes a term, you just renew. Private loans, it's coming due in 6 months, a year, 2 years. How am I going to pay this off? Like
just for the sake of the audience understanding too, when you are talking about private loans, you mean institutional private lending. You're not talking about capital raising, are you?
I'm talking. So in my case, it's actually just been prom notes. I know enough people and investors that I just talk to them. The reality of it is, people know the value of social media and building a following and stuff. Yeah. But the reality of it is, I DM a couple people and they're like, "Yeah, here's $100 grand. I trust you." And
okay, but is that for capital? Like, is it secured? Yeah. Is it like a mortgage? Because
there's unsecured.
Okay, all right. Because it's different. Sometimes when people use the term private loans, it's unclear sometimes if they're talking about like going to, I don't know.
From
you can go to
brokers.
Yeah. So like the levels of it would be like from the riskiest. So say from the borrower's perspective, the best money you could probably borrow would be just unsecured promissory note funds, which is friends, family, fellow investors. Hey, I need 50 grand. I need 100 grand. I'll pay you 8 to 12% interest or whatever it may be monthly by e-transfer. And then at the end of the 6, 12, 24 months, whatever it may be, I'm going to pay that loan out. Because I'm in the middle of a BRRRR, and upon refinance, I'll be able to pay you out.
Yeah, so it has nothing to do with any property. Yeah.
No, it's not specifically tied to any particular building, although as an investor, we should tie it to something. Yeah. It should be associated with a project. And then the next step would be talking with a mortgage broker, and they may have private lenders they're willing to work with, and it's just people that aren't banks. It's just people. Like any of us, anyone listening could call a mortgage broker right now and say, I've got 200 grand. Can you lend it out for me in form of a mortgage? And they'll be like, yeah, we could probably get you 8% for that money or 10% or whatever it may be, depending on if it's first, second position.
Yeah.
It's just people loaning either directly to you or through a broker to you. If you go through a broker, you're going to pay a broker fee. You're also going to secure the loans at that point against a property, which makes it a mortgage.
Yeah.
Unsecured is how borrowers are going to prefer things. But from the lending perspective, it's the most risky. Generally, don't recommend it to people. Anyone who has loaned to me that way, every time I pay them out, I say, be careful what you do. I know this went well with me, but be extremely cautious about doing this with other people. They very well just might not pay you back. And we've seen plenty of that happening the last while. Bankruptcies and people losing millions of dollars of other people's money. So other people's money, there's other people on the side of it. And I think that my goal has always been scale a portfolio without partners and without large amounts of private money. It allows me to have the most peace of mind. It allows me to have the most pride of ownership in my buildings. And when I say I own 83 units, I actually own 83 units. Me, not me and 3 other people or whatever it may be.
And that's one of the biggest differences. And people let the ego get in the way and they want to say I own this many units, but it's really they own it and they were like 5% shareholder of like an investment group, right?
Yeah, 5% shareholder. That's funny.
No, I mean that's what some people are, and it's okay. Right, because there will be, 5% of a big pie is still a pretty big piece, right? If you can get it to that point, it really sounds a lot better than it is, and I think it's sometimes misleading, right?
Yeah, it
so
is.
it is good when you're able to grow in that place. So just to bring it into reality a little bit,
I'll lend 50K to you and I'll call myself like, hey, I own 83 units.
Exactly.
Oh my god,
there's a lot of people who do.
That's funny.
I own a building. It's like what it's like a. Like there was a quote on The Office. Dwight was like, Dwight bought the building. I don't know if anyone remembers. He buys the building of that the office is in, and then he's talking to Frank, the security guard, or Hank, the security guard, and he's like, I bought the building, and Hank's like, yeah, I own a 1/8 share in a timeshare in a thing, and Dwight's like, I'm 1/8 proud of you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When I started investing in Hamilton, right? I remember everybody was telling me, why would you invest in Hamilton? It's a crap city, right? It's just like, but when I started buying property here, I was buying property, and like my first triplex was like $95,000.
Wow, awesome.
Right, 95K, and my mom, after going to Rich Dad Poor Dad seminar, she was the one who convinced me to do it, and she's just like, it's not going to get any cheaper, and she was right, and just went up.
Great.
But the thing about that taught me is that generally when you buy things that are well within your affordable range, like people sometimes look at their income threshold, like what you said about the I guess that flex program with Scotiabank and keeping things at the 50% threshold, right? You can do that with more affordable properties. And this goes back to the adage of like when people are talking about the challenges of getting into real estate, doing the BRRRR strategy. It's like not thinking that they need to buy where they can afford and rent where they want to live, right? And if you do that, you can start buying properties further out. Because where are your properties primarily located? Are they all around London, St. Catharines?
They're actually all within like a 15-minute walk of my house. They're all in London.
Yeah.
They're all in the core area of the city and within a few neighborhoods.
Which means that when you were picking most of these up, they're not like buying properties closer to Toronto where they're just really expensive.
No, yeah.
Right?
They're halfway reasonable prices.
Halfway, yeah.
Yeah, especially the deals I was buying were particularly inexpensive.
Okay,
yeah.
So I think that's important to mention to the audience listening, because if they want to do this, they can't be looking and say, oh, how am I going to apply this? Look at this property here in Toronto. This is costing this much. Well, obviously, these properties are not about that cash flow.
And the reality is they were all shitholes, like to begin with. Like they were all filled with like hoarders and like lots of drug use. Like we've cleaned out boxes of needles and all of the stuff, all of the worst things you can imagine. I've dealt with absolutely all of it many times over. And that's how the money's made. You got to walk into a building and go, oh, this is disgusting. And no, great. That means that like 95% of the other people that walk through the building have said no to it already. Yeah. So now you're able to negotiate.
Yeah, exactly. I used to play this game early on where I would go to these properties with my girlfriend, and if she was just like ill, I'll be like, money.
Perfect. Yeah, that's the smell of money.
Exactly
it smells like cat pee. There's an opportunity. Yeah,
that's exactly it. So I think that's important to contextualize, and I think that will help people get a realistic understanding of where BRRRR works. Because a lot of coaches today, especially with evaluations that are happening, people are just like, BRRRR doesn't work.
Oh yeah,
right?
For sure. Yeah,
it's like
and there's a lot of in the coaching world. There's a lot of just buy something because people want to see that there's success happening amongst the students or whatever it may be. But like the nice thing about investing solely is that you don't need to scale fast. You need to do half as many deals as if you were to do it with a partner. So maybe the plan was to buy 4 properties with a partner. It's like, why not buy 2 yourself? It's half the work. It's the exact same profit, and there's a lot more pride of ownership in it.
Well, I can tell you why, actually. A lot of people, the reason why I think they do that is because they want to quit their job and say, and this is where I think the ego comes into play, and say that they're a full-time real estate investor, and sometimes they realize that the work they're actually doing is they're either a property manager or they are a contractor or there's something else. And it's kind of in that sense, there's nothing wrong with this, but it's kind of like buying a gas station and then manning the till.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. You're buying another job, which is a step in the right direction.
It's okay.
Yeah.
It's just
be honest
real,
with yourself.
right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So,
and I was like, real estate investing is 20 jobs. You're a negotiator, you're a property manager, you're a contractor, you're a therapist for the tenants, like you're like, and for the contractors, it's 1,000 jobs, and there's a lot to learn, and that's what makes it so fun. And it's nice to do a lot of that stuff yourself to begin with, because you get that much better at hiring out in the future. You understand how difficult property management is, and you're a lot more comfortable with the idea of outsourcing it. And you understand, there was what was this $200 maintenance thing? Why it's like, because properties cost money to maintain, and that's why that cost is on your like my property managers are like super happy to work with me. They really like working with me, and it's because I'm super understanding of them, and they treat me really well because of that. They're helping with cash out keys, turning units over, and I'm a really easy to client to work with, and I mean that's how all of my contractors and all that stuff. Everyone I work with, the goal is to provide value to them, and just the law of reciprocity. It's karma, and I mean it's totally fine. Too. Yeah, and it's totally fine to be completely honest about that. Like I'm trying to help people so that they'll help me too. Like, great. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. It's not a malicious thing, you know?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
What was the biggest learning curve jumping from like the duplex, triplex, all the way to like multifamily, like apartment buildings?
And at what point, what property was the multifamily one?
It was, so I actually bought some sixplexes during the first 10 properties. I think 2 of them were sixplexes, but they're converted dwelling. And still to this day, most of the stuff I'll have is like converted dwelling, like so non-purpose built buildings. You know, someone chopped up a single family home into 4 to 6 units or whatever it is along the way.
Were they legal then?
Some of them are legal non-conforming. Some of them were illegal. I've sold a couple of those off. You know, there's a time and a place for those. I think during someone's growth phase, if they can add a lot of value to a building like that, and their plan is to only own it for a few years and then sell it off, that's totally fine. But I've since sold off, I think, all of my illegal buildings at this point. London has rental licensing, and so there's some gray areas there, you know, like whether you're getting licenses and stuff. But like in terms of like meeting fire code, zoning, things like that, you always want to have stuff that, you know, you own these buildings and you know that you can have them for 20 years, and there's not an asterisk beside that going, unless the city finds out about it. So 2021 is where I really made a dramatic switch. That was a turning point, and that was when I bought 2 8-plexes, an 11-plex, and a 24 unit. The most difficult part of that was the capital intensive. It's extremely capital intensive. Because the 24 unit building was over $1 million down payment, and that was with no partners. And and I would love to be able to do something like that with no private debt. And I did for that one, but then I bought all those others, and so I brought on private debt, and that was a good lesson learned. You know, I got a little more over leverage than I'd like to, and that's why I had to make that correction really recently and sell a couple buildings, because, you know, when interest rates rose and I had my apartment building, my 24 unit apartment building, the mortgage rate went up $8,000 a month, and so that just crushed all the cash flow and more. Luckily, I've turned 8 of the 24 units over in that building, but yeah, extremely capital intensive, especially without partners. So the lesson learned, I suppose, there was just scale up, chill, you know, like get the 24 unit. You don't have to, you know, or get the 24 and the 11, maybe not one of the 8s or whatever it is. Make sure that peace of mind is built into your acquisitions. Alex Hormozy talked about that. Like if it costs peace of mind, don't buy it because the cost is too high. You know, peace of mind is everything.
Yep.
You know, you need to get your sleep at night, and you don't want to, every time you buy a building, go, now I'm going to be stressed for the next 6 months.
Yeah.
It's like, no, like buy something so that like you feel good about how this could play out, you know?
Do you think it would have been different? Because like we partner with people, right? But and when we sometimes get private money, we make a decision: are we getting this money in the form of a loan? Are we getting this in the form of joint investment?
Right.
Right. So, for example, I think sometimes the way that we would be stressed out in certain situations if things went out of control, and then our bills also went out of control. But sometimes when we work with investors who are invested and they also get a share of the profits, that means that they also burden some of the losses. So it's spread a little more evenly.
Yeah.
And do you feel like that would be, you know, like make things more manageable in the situation that you described if the money was coming in as investment rather than loan?
Personally, I think overall it's a net win to do it yourself because you have to do half the deals. So while you can offload some of the potential risk and stuff by having partners involved, you have to do twice the number of deals. It's twice the number of work. Like I see the value of camaraderie and having people involved that can help, you know, you can use their strengths and they can use yours and that sort of thing. But what I like about investing yourself is like, first off, you kind of become a Renaissance man. You learn all of those things. You kind of have to. And then if not, you become better at outsourcing, because if you have a partner to take it on for you, well, they're doing the outsourcing and you're not learning that skill as much or whatever it is. And then the value as well is, you know, you can bring on people that have that sense of camaraderie. You know, my property management team, my GC, they have the same goals in mind as I do. They want units to turn over because they get renovation work to do, and they get more property management income because the unit rents for twice as much, and they get better tenants. So we all are in the same. Our goals are aligned, but I still have all the equity. I've always tried to approach a lot of this stuff with like, how can I get best of both worlds? If the reality of that for some people is I'm going to do half the number of deals, my ego will take a hit. I'm going to make just as much money, I mean, it sounds like a win to me, you know?
Yeah. By the way, like I think one thing that you have been doing like extremely well is to stick to your investing philosophy.
Thank
right?
you. Yeah.
Just like all the distraction that we were describing, you're like, no, I'm going back to this.
This is what I do with most of my coaching students as well. It's just like, hey, I'm looking at this rent to own. I'm looking at this. It's like, no, this, like, we're gonna BRRRR a property like that. Like, everyone knows that should, like, well, people should know that should be the backbone of most people's business if their goal is to build a portfolio of real estate. You should know how to buy properties under market value, renovate them strategically, bring them in for a refinance, and take that money and put it into the next deal. That's the backbone of any business when it comes to building a portfolio. So why not become an expert at exactly that and avoid all the other distractions? And the nice thing about it is, if that's all you're doing, you actually have a ton of free time too. Like we've traveled an absurd amount. That's like more than I'd like to. My fiance really loves traveling. So last year we did a month in Australia, 2 weeks in New Zealand, 3 weeks in Norway, a couple of weeks in Costa Rica, a 1 month van trip out to the east coast of Canada.
Awesome.
Like all this stuff. So like maybe less work is totally okay too, you know, like that means that you can also embrace other things in your life as well. Yeah. The reality of it is, if you're trying to live a well-balanced life, you want to eat well. That takes work. You got to cook or whatever. Or you got to have the money to come in to hire a chef to do it or whatever it is. You got to work out a few times a week. You know, that takes an hour or two of your day to get there and back and whatever, every, 3 times a week. You want to maintain a healthy relationship. So you want to have your date nights. You want to have your quality time, all of those things. And you want to have a successful business. If you have too much on the go, those other things are absolutely going to take a hit. There's no way to do all of that stuff and keep it well balanced unless you're extremely disciplined. And it is possible, but like I've noticed in my lifestyle, like this last while I'm ramping things up, like we're doing a ton of renovations. I'm scaling the coaching business, that kind of stuff. So like just the only way to get around all of that is just a ton of self-discipline. So luckily, we have a lot of good influencers out there that talk about the stuff, and like Goggins and whatever. Okay, I need to wake up. I need to eat well. I need to go to the gym. I need to come back. I need to work. And then in the evening, I need to set aside time for, quality time with my fiance. And it's like, all of this stuff needs to be, it's a ton of work. And it's actually no wonder that most people, their life is in some degree of disarray, because the only way to have all of those things is to just have a ton of self-discipline almost every hour of every day.
Yeah, and actually do it.
Yeah,
a lot of people do a lot of thinking, planning, and they don't get to it.
No, yeah. but we know that during those times we feel the best. It takes a ton of self-discipline. And it takes some degree of reflection and gratitude as well to look back and see what you've done and feel the accomplishment. And
you nailed it on the head when it's just like, it depends on like what it is that your philosophy is towards life and how you want to structure that balance. Because like even for us, like we went through a period of time, and that's why we came up with the brand, the Property Hustlers, is because it's really about hustling in this game for us. And there's a time for it. There's a time when you just want to devote to your craft, to whatever it is. Because you said it gave you a lot of free time. And what are you doing with that time?
Yeah.
It depends what it is you want to do. Some people are just like, well, I have free time. I want to immerse myself more.
Yeah.
And the whole thing about partnering, that, again, is like, it depends what you want. Because you're right. Work less for more is what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
And some people want to work more because working more gives you infrastructure.
Yeah.
Right? Like it starts to give you connections, because now those people, yes, you're getting a smaller piece of the pie, but that network and that infrastructure, it can be very valuable.
They all feed into each other.
Exactly. So let's say if you're a realtor or you're a broker or you're somebody who has a profession that synergizes into real estate, partnerships, I can see why people do it. But if you're the type of person who's just like, I want time.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, I think, just go lean, go light, and go steady.
Yeah, and I think people need to look like, what's the 20-year future look like? Are there kids involved? Like, well, like how much of this is something that works now, and how much of it will work later as well. So that was a lot of this as well. Is like I moved into apartment buildings because I realized, first off, it's a lot less mental bandwidth to think about the 13 buildings I own, because some of them, one's a 24, one's an 11, right? Rather than I own 50 buildings or 100 with partners or whatever it is, and all of that I need to think about, like, is that furnace coming up? Or is it like, what's the parking situation at this building? Even if you're outsourcing all that stuff, you now need to watch the watchers. You need to keep an eye and manage the managers. So my philosophy with all this stuff is to some degree of simplicity. And the simpler things are, the easier they are to scale, because there's just less to think about. I mean, I took it too far to some degree. I self-managed 52 units, and I self-managed 32 of them while working full time. So I think that sometimes this can be taken a little far, but
Were you with your fiance at the time?
yeah, during a chunk of it, yeah, we've been together 4 years, so something like whatever the timeline.
We noticed that our limitation, like our maximum units that we could handle by ourselves each, was about like 15 to 20 units.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
So as soon as we hit like 25, we're like, we gotta hire someone.
Yeah,
before it started taking away from like your personal stuff and your growth.
Yeah, exactly.
Because honestly, like I think a lot of people hit this point where they realize that the time they spend dealing with maintaining their property and dealing with the tenants, it's actually taking away from being a real estate investor.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
If you're self-managing for too long, then you may end up going, well, do I want to take on that building because then I got to deal with the tenants and whatever, versus like I have management. I'm going to take on that building. The management's going to take over. Like, awesome. Now I just need to focus on, well, how do I get the turnover, budget the cash for keys, plan the renovations, like all the high level decisions. At this point, for me, business looks like standing at my standing desk and staring at spreadsheets and trying to come up with good solutions. High level decision making. I'm glad to finally be there because it's taken forever. There is still some day to day, but like it's a lot of just high level decision making. I would say once or twice a week, I'll come up with a $50,000 win of some, like, oh, if I turn that unit over, I'll get an extra $700 a month. And over the next 5 years, that's, 50 or whatever it is, it's like,
right.
Cool, let's make that the focus. Okay, we got that turnover. If I restructure this debt and move it over to this lender, maybe we can get a slightly lower interest rate. And this is on $1 million, loan. So that ends up being this much interest saved over this long. Cool, I just made 30 grand. So it makes no sense for me to be focused on all these other little things when I can make these high level decisions.
Yeah. You need to be a little bit distance, so that you have the, I guess, headspace to actually think about those type of stuff.
Yeah.
The way I'm looking at it, it's interesting when we describe it as like it is a lean operation with respect to you're not partnering, you don't have as many moving parts. The moving parts are actually relatively simple, and they're outsourced in a clean way. You're not running a property management; you hire a property manager. Right?
That was a multi-week decision.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no, I'm sure everybody goes through it because no one's going to do it better than you because you did a lot of things yourself, right? So much yourself that you understand the operation from the bottom up. So you grew it bottom up. The thing is that this strategy is obviously working because you're also buying in a market that reflects this feasibility. Like the properties that you were buying were in that affordable scale. People were buying a $800 to $1 million duplexes. This is obviously not going to work.
No,
right? Because the rents are actually not that far off with respect to the cost of the property.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, exactly. So it works there. So if people want to be employing the strategy, I think they really have to look at properties that may be far away from where they live.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely. You need to look at markets where the numbers make sense. If the goal is forcing appreciation and the property at least floating itself or hopefully cash flowing after a refinance, find a market where those numbers work. The reality of it is a lot of people would probably say London isn't even particularly exciting for those numbers right now. But, if you find the right deal, it can work. So don't just look on the MLS, and if you are, look at the MLS, but subtract 50 or 100 grand. Because I got an 8-plex recently for 100, or like a little over a year ago for 150 grand under asking. That was actually while the market was still super hot. And it was on the MLS. I put an offer in $150,000 under and they just accepted. So a lot of times the stuff on the MLS, people aren't looking at how does this property look when the dust settles, Now it doesn't make sense, but how can we make it turn into a deal? And maybe you wouldn't buy it for this much, but how much would you buy it for? And then find a number that makes sense and just throw that offer in.
Okay, for any beginner who's coming to you for coaching and mentorship, and they're like, okay, I want to get into real estate 2023. I have maybe like 100K, 150K. Like, what kind of advice would you give it to them? What kind of strategy and where do they start?
A lot of the people I work with at this point own a couple properties and they want to scale from there or whatever it is. But if you're early on, you probably don't really need a coach. If you have like a couple hundred, like 150 grand or something like that, or 200 grand, like, okay, maybe at that point, you could take on 2 or 3 properties depending on the market you're in. It's not hard to get the right advice to save 10 grand or whatever it is, like whatever the coaching costs, like it's not hard to make that back with solid piece of advice, If it's your very first property, I still think the best way to structure it is 5% down using a purchase plus improvements on a duplex or 10% on a triplex or fourplex.
It doesn't have to be your first. You can do 5% down or 7% down in like many cases. It doesn't have to be your first property.
If you're moving in, yeah. Generally, it's CMHC is going to be more likely to approve it if they see the story makes sense. And so it makes a lot more sense for the first, maybe
for the first couple of properties, but like I've like, because I know we have a student doing the same thing. We lives in one property, 5% down, and then they say, oh, I don't like it here. I'm moving to another property, 7% down.
And then they
go for that.
I know people who've done it 4 or 5 times. But like it's crazy. Like there's CMHC, there's Genworth, and there's Canada Guarantee. Those are the 3 insurers. Certain lenders work with only some of them, and others Scotia works with all 3. If you're working with the right person at the right bank, they'll make the application specifically to a certain insurer.
Yeah.
So sometimes you can squeeze that. I know I tried getting 5% down on a triplex, and I tried convincing them it was a duplex, and I tried convincing them it was like this crazy. They ended up like denying it, but like
it's like shut up.
They were like, "Come on, this story makes no sense. You just did 5% down like 4 months ago."
And you're working direct with the bank, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So then, there's a little more rigidity.
Yeah. But yeah, you can try to take advantage of 5 to 10% down as long as you can. It's a pretty valuable approach. 5 or 10% down on a duplex or triplex or fourplex, ideally house hack if you can. And I would use a purchase plus improvements mortgage because it'll allow you to say get up to 95% loan to value again, like after you've done the renovations. So now it opens you up to a bunch of properties that need work, and you're not just buying it with 5% down, putting all this money in, and then now your money's stuck. So that's going to be one of your better ways to start still.
And how would you advise them to source the deal?
Yeah, on and off market. You kind of need to do all of it. It's a game of volume. Finding off market deals, anyone who does it knows that you need to do whatever you're doing at scale. You need to do a ton of volume. If you're flyering, you send out as many flyers as you can. If you're knocking doors, you knock on as many doors as you can. If you're cold calling, you're cold calling as much as you can. So it's just a game of volume. Some people, like when you have a wholesaling business, you'll end up getting like actual acquisitions managers, but they're doing the same stuff. You're just outsourcing someone to do that volume. So I actually did a YouTube video a few years back on how to find off-market deals. It's on my YouTube channel if people want to look. It's like probably 15 ways to find off-market deals. You need to do all of it though. Lowballing on market stuff, looking at anything that's been sitting for more than 15, 30 days, that kind of stuff.
We have a lot of fun with that. One of the things we teach is like whenever we make offers now, we have to feel bad about it.
When you feel a little embarrassed.
I just made a post on Instagram recently that was like, if you're not embarrassed by your offer, it's not low enough.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that's the way to look at it.
Yeah. One of our students was asking, it's like, well, who do I find to make those offers? I'm like, you got to do it. It's like, can I get an agent? I'm just like, no, the agent's gonna hate you.
Yeah.
Or
exactly.
if you get up there, it's like, what if I get a burner agent? I'm like, well,
just call the listing agent directly. They're gonna be a lot more incentivized to double end it. So
that's exactly it, right? And we teach people how to like leverage. Honestly, this is where it gets great when we tell people to leverage ethics, because it's hard to say that leverage ethics. I gotta take that part, but like it's not so much leverage the ethics, but leverage the disposition. Because to say that somebody's not going to be influenced by being able to double end the commission, is ridiculous. Of course, they're going to be influenced by it, right?
It's leveraging incentives. Yeah, you need to understand what the incentive of everyone involved is, and then line it up so that they want the same result.
Exactly, right? And it's hard to really get people to understand. Like when we're teaching people how the realtor system works, it's like, well, listen, I'm trying to learn how to find these deals. Why are you teaching me how the realtor system works?
Yeah.
Because sometimes you're not playing the game, you're playing the people.
Yeah. For sure. I know people who have their realtor license and still call the listing agent and allow them to do the deal.
Yeah.
And then if the negotiation isn't going quite the way they want, we're like 10 grand off. Well, okay, we'll do this offer, but I'm representing myself now. And then they squeeze that last little bit out of it to make the deal work, right?
Yeah. But then they won't want to work with you again.
Well, what are you going to do?
Real estate community
I'm not a realtor, so I can say this stuff.
Yeah, you know what? I think we should start wrapping it up. But listen, I just have a couple questions I think are important for the people listening to know. So first things first, when you structured in a 3-tier, do you draw a salary from from the operations company?
So for the first, no, as of now, I don't. The money is generally transferred from the operating company, from like the active company into the passive company. The reality of it is when you start structure to begin with, you're lending a ton of money personally to the corporation for the initial acquisitions.
Yeah.
Because you're starting corp, it has no money. You loan it hundreds of thousands. It buys real estate. Now it owes you hundreds of thousands. So for years to come, you can just pay yourself back the amount that you originally loaned the corp.
Tax-free.
Tax-free, yeah.
That's actually, that answers that
and
question.
And it's nice because you're taking that money, putting it into buildings, refinancing it all tax-free, and then you're still able to take a lot of that money and put it back into your personal name, all completely above board.
That makes sense, and I think that's something that people have to consider, which brings me to the next question. When you started buying, you said after 10 or 11 properties, you started buying properties under a corporation, right? How did that look? How did that look from a financing perspective? Like, was it now commercial financing? Was it now residential financing? Was it a different type of lender? How did that look?
It was almost identical. I was working with credit unions, and generally they're looking, even when you're buying in a corp, they're looking at your personal stuff. They're blurring the lines between the two, and and because I own everything myself and the corp is only myself, it's all basically me applying. So they just kind of take it all. I send them a portfolio, and I'm just like, these are the ones owned personally, these are the ones in the corp, but they basically look at it as a whole.
There's obvious long-term benefits when you put properties into corporations when it comes to the capital gains later.
I think it ends up being pretty similar. The advantage in the future, and I'm not a tax expert, but the advantage in the future is that you can sort of pay yourself dividends strategically so that you're not earning all of the money in the same year. So you can kind of pay yourself out profits more strategically. But the reason I set up the corp was so that I could take active income and buy real estate with it, essentially, and pay lower tax. It was also because a lot of lenders eventually want to see a corporate structure. If you have 83 units, they don't want to see all that in your personal name. At some point, it just becomes a little absurd.
So we're actually only doing 3 to 4 properties under one corp, right? Anything over that, they don't want to our mortgage brokers then you gotta
separate it into a new corp.
Yeah, otherwise you're providing a lot of financial statement for each property, right? Each corporation, whenever we need to apply for the next mortgage, right?
Right.
So every lender looks at different things.
I only have the one corp owning all the real estate. They haven't requested me to separate it into different corporations. So
no liability concerns?
No, I mean, for the most part, even when you own properties personally, you have a ton of insurance, like slip and falls are the main liability concern, and insurance people deal with this constantly, fires and things like that. Like, this is the point in property insurance. If you're concerned about liability, you get a bigger insurance policy. But what I was going to say is that I did end up moving a lot of these properties from my personal name into my corp. And that was a messy, expensive, annoying process.
That's a lot of land transfer tax.
A lot of them had land transfer. There were some that I did a bare trust agreement with. You can transfer those into your corporation tax-free if you bought them essentially within the last year or so. You talk to your accountant about all the details of that, but you can do bare trust agreements to move properties into your corp. And then you can also do Section 85 rollovers. That's going to be something maybe you've owned in your personal name for many years. Now you want to move it into the corp. You can move it in, pay the land transfer tax, which sucks, but you can avoid capital gains tax if you structure it properly. So it works best when you haven't refinanced a property in a while. And even if you have, you can temporarily pay them. This is very complicated, but you can temporarily pay the mortgage down. I'm doing that as of right now. I'm moving a sixplex from my personal name into my corp because I know I'm going to own it for the next 20 years. I'm going to temporarily pay the mortgage down $200,000, then move it into my corp, and then
re-leverage.
And the only reason is temporarily reduce the mortgage size so that the Section 85 rollover results in zero capital gains. Completely above board. The CRA can see that you've done that, and it's totally fine.
I'm actually not familiar with that.
I'm not. Yeah, that's
it's messy, but just like get any accountant could walk you through. Any real estate focused accountant could walk through a Section 85 rollover. By the end of this year, I should only have one property in my personal name, and that's the one I live in, which you want to keep in your personal name for the tax exemption.
Okay, so if you had to redo it over again, at what point would you have started putting properties under commercial?
Anything that I know that I was going to own for 20 years to come, I would have probably put into the corp. But I wouldn't say that everyone should start a corp up immediately. I think it makes sense to get the first 5 or so in your personal name. The reality of it is at that point, you don't really know what you want. So you're like, I'm going to own this forever. And then 2 years later, you're like, I'm selling it. So you're still learning during that time. And you're actually learning about whether you even enjoy this at all. You don't want to set up this whole corporate structure and then find out you don't like real estate investing and then have this mess, and it's bookkeeping and then you got to pay for multiple tax returns. And
exactly. And then you spend all the money just to find out that this is not for me.
It's overcomplicating. And man, you can imagine when I focused on simplicity, how much it was a big thing for me to go, I'm going to set up this 3-tiered corporate structure and blah, blah, blah. I was like, man, I really like just owning everything in my personal name and just going to the bank, get another mortgage. It's all just simple, but it made sense. It made sense. And I was at first charging myself management fees. Now I have a management company doing it, but I'm still able to earn active income in the one and take advantage of that.
I feel when you spend the money, you write things off.
Yeah.
Right. And you can't write off your sweat equity.
Yep.
You really have to look at your finances to determine when sweat equity is more valuable, because it might actually be more valuable to go and earn. So one, your income is bigger. And then pay somebody so you can write off.
Yeah.
Because people always talk about how do I save money. But really, if you actually learn to save on those taxes, when you're making $100K and you're paying $27,000 in taxes, if you can learn to reduce that, that's money.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And real estate is the best tax shelter across the board for so many things.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Just learn and leverage the taxes.
And again, this is the value of BRRRR. People know all these things and then they forget about them. But like it's all tax-free, at least tax-deferred until the eventual sale. And there's just so many advantages to BRRRRing and just holding long-term real estate, building a portfolio, having a significant number of assets under management, mortgage pay down. Even right now with terrible interest rates, my portfolio is still getting paid down like 10 or 12 grand a month. At some point it was significantly higher when rates were better and the amortization schedules worked out better. But
were you on variables?
I had 3 variables. That was why I had the one mortgage go up 8 grand a month. But I had a lot of fixed as well. Half of my portfolio is exposed to current rates at this point, which is good because I'm good in that I'm understanding that my portfolio is able to withstand it, which helps.
Yeah.
But I'd rather it not. But a lot of people need to understand that in the coming few years, if they have, like, their fixed mortgage is going to come up for renewal, it's probably going to be a higher rate than it is right now. So plan accordingly. Everyone should have a section in their spreadsheet where they adjust the interest rate and say, okay, if the rate was 2% higher, what would my whole portfolio look like? I like to have a whole dashboard for my entire portfolio. And that's what I stare at. And that's where I find opportunities in my portfolio for high level activities.
That's how you make the decision.
High level decisions, yeah.
Yeah. If anybody wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way? Instagram, email, how do people get in touch?
Instagram's the best, Kellan.James. And then my website is kellanjames.ca. That's where I have my mentorship program as well. So it's like 6 months. You work directly with me. I don't hire it out to other coaches. And I just teach people how to do exactly what I did based on their specific situation, especially people who've got a couple properties under their belt and want to scale up.